Let's do a quick little recap of things we've discussed and wrap up Unit 1. So, just a quick little recap of some of the things we discussed yesterday. Obviously, we kicked this course off and we started talking about agency and some of the basic terminologies of understanding agency, like the agent, and we said the agent defaults to the firm. Is it possible that the agent is not a firm? Sure, there is sole proprietors that can exist, but typically most licensees are affiliated with a firm, and as such that makes the firm the agent. And then of course we talked about sub-agent, which is literally the agent of the agent. Everybody who is affiliated with said firm is a sub-agent of the firm. And then we got into the principal and client being the person that hires us, customers, everybody else. And we got all the way into some pretty in-depth discussions on basic understandings of dual agency versus designated. And we'll continue to talk on that, and I gave you some real-world examples. And then we wrapped up the day with the working with the real estate agent's disclosure. And we looked at it, the seller side, the buyer side. And I think we realized that it was all exactly like I said it was. It was very much this or that or this or that. And that is, remember, the menu of options. And so let's continue talking about the working with real estate agents disclosure just a little bit more. So we looked at it, we reviewed it, hopefully we'll understand it. Now it is very important to understand, as I said yesterday, that it is basically a menu of options. If our firm offers it, if it could arise, we're letting them know that that could arise. Folks, if you go to a restaurant and they don't have the ribeye, if they're out of it, you can't order it. And so, as I said, there are firms that don't do dual agency, and as such, that would not be something we check. If you were with a firm talking to a prospective buyer or seller, and your firm has policies where we don't do dual, you don't need to check it. It's not going to arise if they work with you. So it never creates a relationship. It is just telling them what options exist. And then ultimately, after that, we will ask them to form a relationship with us by way of an agency agreement. Very important to understand, both in real life and for the test, that the working with real estate agents disclosure is not a contract and does not create a relationship. Okay? So, we looked at it in depth, but let's just remind you that it is required in all sales transactions. It's another big mistake that people will make, and yet again, very testable. If I give you a question and I say, is this required in all transactions? The answer is no, because sometimes we help tenants, sometimes we're acting as a property manager. And in those relationships, nobody's buying or selling. So this has to be made at first substantial contact as the deadline, meaning no later than the time they start trying to give you any confidential information or we start to ask for it, and to any prospective buyers or prospective sellers, both residential and commercial. Folks, basically what you should think of the working with real estate agents disclosure as, and the best way to think of it, bar none, is the Miranda rights for real estate. You know what the Miranda rights is. What's the Miranda rights, folks? Come on, you know.
You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, and that's a good thing. You married a law enforcement, Katina, you would know it. But listen, you don't even have to give that, because every single person and their grandmama watches some type of Law and Order or CSI or some kind of show where people get arrested all the time, and that's one of their favorite things to bring into it. So the Miranda rights, as Katina said, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Well, the working with real estate agents disclosure is the real estate version of the Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a real estate transaction unless you hire me. That's it. That's what it is. Because if they're not with us, we're against them. There is this big divide, and that's why I told you honesty and fairness is borderline laughable, because it's the honesty and fairness is telling them we will take you to the cleaners if you give us the opportunity. And so we've got to warn them of that in the first place so they don't self-incriminate, as we like to say. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about first substantial contact already. But let me clarify something. There are so many different ways that first substantial contact can happen. Folks, it is not always going to be face-to-face. The rules state that if we are making first substantial contact face-to-face, then we need to give you the working with real estate agents disclosure. Now, it doesn't say that it has to be the paper copy, but it does have to be written. So that means that you would have to like email it to them right then and there to technically be in compliance with the rules if you're meeting face-to-face. But if you're meeting somebody or having first substantial contact, should I say, in means other than face-to-face, like on a phone call, an email, or something like that. Because we all know that one of the big parts of being a real estate agent is trying to get leads. And if somebody goes to your website and they put in some information and they say in an email, well, hey, I've got a house, I owe $200,000 on it, I'd like to find out what I could sell it for. Folks, that's for substantial contact. But you couldn't talk to them because they just emailed that straight to you. So the rule is, if it ever occurs by phone or by email, you still need to verbally go over the working of the real estate agent's disclosure immediately, meaning email them back and explain it, or on the phone explain it, and then you need to get them a copy of the actual disclosure within 3 days of that initial correspondence, whichever way it happens. But if it's happening face to face, you need to give them a copy right then, right there. Now, I told you open houses are kind of an interesting thing because we are face-to-face with them. Now, I want to explain something. As I said yesterday, there is absolutely zero obligation to give out the working with real estate agents disclosure to every consumer who walks into an open house. Could you? Sure. Are you legally required to? No. But once those conversations starts going to, I have to be in a contract, I have this much money, I'm going through a nasty divorce, anything that would be confidential, we would need to stop them, give them the working with real estate agents disclosure before we continue on. But I will make another point just to make sure you're all on the same page here. When you wrap up your open house and you turn off all the lights and you lock the doors and you take down your open house signs and you go out and you load it all into the back of your car. Okay, never fails. If you've never done an open house, there's always some random person who pulls up. Oh crap, dang it. Oh geez, are you done? I was trying to make it to this open house. Oh, that's such a bummer. Is there any way you'll still show it to me? Never failed. Caroline's over there like, yep, happens every time. There's always somebody who shows up right as you're closing up the open house, like they didn't have 3 hours to get there. And so I want you to understand something. Technically, the way the rules are written, your open house is now done. If you're going to take this one-off person back in there, you now need to give them the working with real estate agents disclosure. Because the way the open houses are structured, any Joe Schmo can walk on the street, and we don't know if they're qualified to buy, if they're, serious. We don't know any of that. But open houses are kind of like this special category. If you are showing a house to a one-off person, the way that the rule is technically interpreted, you need to give them the working with real estate agents disclosure because it's just a little bit of a different thing. Now, this is what I always like to joke with students. Folks, please understand, there is nobody from the commission waiting in the bushes, just waiting. Gotcha! You didn't give them the working with real estate agents disclosure, right? They're not doing that. They're not hiding out trying to catch on this stuff. But technically speaking, you would need to give them a working with real estate agents disclosure to take them back in after the open house is up. Just like in some of the examples I gave yesterday, if you're the listing agent and somebody calls you and wants to see the house and it's an unrepresented buyer, you better give it to them. If somebody calls you from Zillow and they want to see a house, you better give them the working with real estate agents disclosure. Technically speaking, we're not really even supposed to be showing houses as one-offs unless we represent somebody. And I want you to think about this. Well, if you let that person into the house after the open house is over, you technically do work for somebody automatically. Who is that?
The seller?
The seller. Because you're typically holding an open house on behalf of another licensee in your firm, and that means your firm represents the seller, and as a subagent of the firm, you also represent the seller. Now, we don't really think of it that way, but legally speaking, that's exactly how it works. In the real world, it's so funny, because no, those are your clients, these are my clients. But the scope of it is, it's the firm's clients, and we all technically owe loyalties to all of the firm's clients until we don't. So, let's talk about a couple things here. and I mentioned them yesterday, but we're going to get into them a little bit more in depth. It says, before broker can assist a prospective buyer, the broker must either have express oral or written buyer agency agreement, or disclose in writing that the broker will be working as with the buyer as a seller subagent. This goes back to what I just said, that you have to represent somebody. And so if it's not the buyer, it's the seller. And if it's nobody, folks, you're not in it. So in North Carolina, if you can't get oral buyer agency consent, if you can't get written buyer agency consent, and then it's another firm's listing that you get a phone call to go show, and they're not working with seller subagents, you're not in it. What could you do at that point? If somebody calls you up, they say, I want to see this house, and you meet them there, and they will not agree to let you represent them as a buyer's agent, and that firm is not allowing seller subagency, what's really your only option then at that point?
Will the listing agent have to show them?
The listing agent would technically have to show them the property. And so if it was me personally, I would probably call up the listing agent and say, hey, I got this person. They won't let me represent them as a buyer. I see you're not working with seller subagents. How about I send them to you because you didn't know them until now, and you give me a referral fee? Because then, legal or not, might I open the door to help out that listing agent if they agree to do me a referral fee, right? I mean, make their lives a little bit easier, and let's see if it can all work out. But if that's not an option, folks, if somebody calls me up and I can't represent them, I can't work as a seller subagent, I can't send a referral, I'm going to look them in the eyes and I'm going to say, hey, listen, okay, you see that sign in the yard over there? I need you to call that agent, see how long it's going to take for them to get here. And they going to let you into the house, maybe, if they answer the phone. And I'm going to go to the nearest, closest bar and take 2 shots of tequila and forget you ever wasted my time. Have a good day. Deuces, right? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to roll out. Because folks, we're not a charity. We don't work for free. And if they can't hire us and we can't represent anybody and there's no money to be made, on to the next. So I'll tell you this, and this is where I kind of talked about it yesterday, folks. With the working with real estate agents disclosure, there is a lot of times where people get really uncomfortable with this. And I kind of told you yesterday, you should really consider it something of value. It really does. If you do a good job explaining it, sets you apart. Now, we're all guilty, folks. The thing is, I've been teaching for a very long time, and I've been a real estate broker even longer. And I have seen it. I have done it. There is the expectation, but we get really bad about just meeting somebody, never going over this. And then what happens for most licensees, I guarantee it, is they're like, oh, well, I'll just send it when I send all the other paperwork. And as long as they sign it, then I'm fine. But the thing is, you've never thoroughly explained the dangers to them of if they're not going to hire you. And so we're going to talk about this in the next section, but I want you to think about it. Folks, from a listing agent point of view, do you think there's times where sellers may interview more than one agent to see who's going to list their house? Yeah, all the time. And so imagine that a seller interviews 3 different agents and tells them all confidential information. What's about to happen?
A bidding war, pretty much.
A bidding war, but even more than that. To have the business, yeah, sure. But ultimately, they can only hire one person, right? And so now you've got 2 other people with confidential information. And if they end up working with a buyer who's now their client, they'd be obligated to do what? Share the information. Yeah. So the thing is, people get real uncomfortable with this document because it does seem like paperwork. And so, as I mentioned yesterday, and Katina, kind of referenced it, I typically play off what I like is humor. And everybody kind of has their own way of talking. Everybody kind of has their own way of, discussions. But if I was really meeting somebody for the first time, I would probably make a joke and say, hey, listen, real estate brokers are shady folks. We got to tell you how to protect yourself. Just making a joke. And I'm like, no, not really. But, and then I'd have to explain this. but it's really not that hard to spin this into a conversation. You know, somebody calls you for the first time and they say, hey, I found you on Zillow. You know, I'd like for you to show me this house. And you say, hey, great. Well, have you ever bought a house before? And they say, well, no. And you say, okay, well, let me explain how this works. There are different types of representation in the real estate world. There are people who represent and work for buyers. There's people who represent and work for sellers. There is relationships where we can work for both at the same time, which gets a little iffy. But then there's also this really cool thing called designated dual agency, where, you know, one firm can represent both, but give them exclusive representation with different licensees. So I just want to make sure that you understand that when you hire us, we are going to bat for you. We're looking after your best interest and everything in between, and you can bet on that. But please be aware that if you don't hire us, you shouldn't tell us anything secret, because there are some legal obligations to share that information to clients if you're not our client. And then you just ask if that makes sense, and you give them the form and answer any questions, because people appreciate that you're actually looking after them. As I mentioned yesterday, if you explain that you're telling them this not only because of the legal obligation, but because you'd like to work with them, but you want to make sure they're protected even if you don't end up working with them. And that sets you apart, because if you think about it this way, can you imagine being a buyer who has gone to 6 different open houses on a Saturday, and you get to the 7th one, and the 7th agent gives them the working with the real estate agent's disclosure and explains this to them. They say, well, what's this? I've never seen this before. And they say, well, I just wanted to go ahead and give it to you just in case, because we're sitting here having some good conversations, and I wanted to make sure you're protected, because I didn't want you to share anything confidential with me if you're not going to hire with me or work with me, because I would, you know, be devastated if, you know, you had to use that against you and I didn't properly prepare you for it. Well, folks, what are they going to think about the other 6 agents who did not tell them that? That they're a little shady and iffy, versus you who said, don't give me your secrets. Now, at the end of the day, I'll tell you this, and I don't think I made this analogy yet yesterday with your group, folks. I want you to remember what this class is. This is a laws and rules and best practices class, and how we are legally expected to operate. Now, let me ask you a question. Have any of you folks ever gotten in your automobile vehicle and went driving to the grocery store, the beach, or otherwise, and inadvertently, while you were driving, you ended up going faster than the speed limit? Any of you in here? Yeah, don't you lie to me. Every single one of you has driven faster than the speed limit. Folks, that means you're a criminal. Heathens, all of you. Okay, if you drive faster than the speed limit, you have broken the law. And here's what I will remind you about these classes. I'm teaching you the laws. I'm teaching you the rules. But don't people break the law every single day. And here's what you have to understand about every single post-licensing class, folks. The comparison is speeding. If you decide to speed on 95 while you're heading to Florida for hot girl summer or whatever it is, and you go 15 miles an hour over, you are gambling that there is or is not going to be a police officer on the other side of that tree. Now, folks, what happens when the popo is on the other side of that tree? You're going to have to pay the consequences of speeding. Same thing is true of your real estate brokerage career. Every single day, we decide, are we going to follow the rules or are we going to break the rules? And if you don't get caught, you're not in trouble. You still broke the law, but you're not in trouble. So you're gambling. You know, if the commission catches you, you're going to have to pay the consequences, just like with the speeding. So just keep that in mind. No, as I said, they're not hiding in the bushes. They're not waiting for you. I will tell you where they are watching you, though. A lot of people don't realize this. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission is absolutely watching social media. They are. There have been many, actually, disciplinary actions based on social media posts and people doing things the wrong way. And even with the licensing exam, I don't know if y'all knew about this, but last year there was a licensing exam study group, and people were trying to remember what they were exposed to on the test and relay that information to their peers in the Facebook groups. And there was a big group of agents who put in the work and did the class who were barred from getting their license because they were trying to share that information. And there was even more people who already had a record the day they got their license because they were participating in this Facebook group. And so while they got to keep their license, it was now on their record that they had a disciplinary action as a brand new broker. Imagine being one day into the business and having a disciplinary action, you know? But the laws are the laws, the rules are the rules. Folks, will the police ever let you off if you say, well, I didn't see the speed limit sign? No. I didn't know that was the law. I didn't know it was illegal to do that. Oops. They're never going to let you off for that. So, up next, you will take an end of unit assessment before moving on to unit 2.